Welcome back to Communicology. We're 30-some episodes in, and it's dawned on me I've never stopped to define communication, which is kind of weird because, well, I guess I just assumed everybody knew, or I just wanted to jump in and didn't think maybe I should start at that basic of a level. But it's a really important thing because, as we've said before, you cannot not communicate. You're always communicating. So why don't we pause for just a second and then say, let's take a good look at communication and understand what we mean when we say communication. Because a lot of times people just say, well, I know how to talk. I've been communicating all my life. I can do this. It's more than just that. So let's talk about really what it is at its heart. Now, I'm going to use a definition from the scholars Lehman and Dufrene. And I came across this years and years ago, like when I first started teaching. And I thought, man, that's a really good definition. It's easy to break down. So it's easy to teach to students. So that's the one I want to use today. So I'll read through it, and then we'll take it just word by word and discuss what is communication, and then we can talk about how important it is. So their definition is quite simple. It's this: the process of exchanging information and meaning between or among individuals through a common system of symbols, signs, and behavior. So again, very crisp, very clean, very technically accurate, but it's packed with so much good information. So let's take a quick look at each part, and then we'll have our nice little overview. So the first thing that's important, we're 2 words in. It's the process. So stop there. It's amazing how many people say, oh, that person's a natural born communicator. Or I just thought I'm not given the gift of communication. No, it's a process. You learn it. And that's why I love this definition, because it starts right. It's a process. No one is born a gifted communicator. I mean, let's be honest. When you were born, you did 2 things. You cried and then you peed all over yourself. Sorry, that's what you did. That's what people do. When they're born, they start crying and they pee all over themselves. That's communicating, but it's not really great communication in the way that we would appreciate it. It would be a very odd conversation if you're having with someone and they start crying and peeing on themselves. That's not normal. For babies, totally acceptable. For adults, not so much. So no one is born a great communicator. It's a process. That's important for you to know and to think about, because you can get better. Now, are some people maybe predisposed to get really good at it and be excellent at certain things? Absolutely. So if you're someone who's more expressive, it's easier to talk and talk to other people. If you're someone who's more, analytical, you're typically quieter. You're typically less likely to charge into chaotic conversation environments, and it's a little bit harder for you to do. So, but you can still learn. Just like an expressive person can learn when to shut up, an analytical can learn when to talk. So like getting on a bicycle over and over and over again, you just keep kind of getting on the bike until you're kind of get used to doing it. Now, again, you might not be ready to do the Tour de France, but you can at least ride your bike competently and ride it well. So understand, number 1, first and foremost, it's a process. So the next step, the process of exchanging information and meaning. So exchanging, let's talk about that. Again, it's not one of those things where I communicate and you just sit there and take it. No, there's always communication going on. So it's not like I'm the mailman or the Amazon delivery driver where I just put on the package and we're done. It's not a delivery and it's over. There's a constant exchange. So even if you're not talking, I'm picking up your nonverbal cues. You're either scowling or you're smiling or you're laughing or you're crying, whatever is going on. I'm picking up on that as I'm talking. And then when you're talking, I'm doing all my nonverbal cues. So, there's this exchange that's going on. So it's not just a quick, I'm delivering and that's the way it is. So again, it's a process that we learn, and that process is an exchange. So what are we exchanging? Well, according to this definition, information and meaning. So information. So let's take them one at a time. I have information that you would like. So I deliver that to you. or you have information I would like and you deliver it to me. So information, all these bits and pieces, all these data points, whatever that we're delivering to each other. And when you think about, the verbal words that we have, the actual language, for verbal communication, all of those words that we have that we're passing on to each other, all of the nonverbal communication pieces and parts that we're passing to each other, the whole lot of it, we are, exchanging that information back and forth. But of course, there's no such thing as just an uncharged word or an uncharged gesture. It carries along something, and that's meaning. So everything that happens, again, it could just be a scowl, or someone's like smiling and happy, or they're gesturing wildly and look frantic, whatever's going on. I'm passing on information, and that information has meaning. So, we have to be aware of our meaning when we're doing it. Again, this is where it's a process, because, passing on the information might not be too terribly difficult, but the meaning is the hard part, especially the interpretation, because I might try to deliver a certain message in a certain way. So I've got the right words with the right nonverbal cues to go with it. There's no guarantee you're going to pick it up. As I've said in a previous message, you can control the message, but you cannot control the meaning. So as soon as I work and craft and do everything I want, and as soon as it leaves me, the person on the other side is now going to be interpreting that however they do it. So that's a big part of it. So it's a process of exchanging information and meaning. So between or among individuals. So between this face-to-face thing that we do in person, that's a between. So I've got myself and I've got you. We're having dialogue. We're having interpersonal communication. So this is a between. So we're exchanging information and meaning between each other. And you think about how all kinds of communication bonds are formed that way. And it's critical to be thinking of this because, again, even if I'm ordering you, like if a police officer is ordering you to give over your license when he pulls you over for speeding, it's still, there's an exchange that's going on. I mean, you can be compliant or not. You could be mouthy. You could be apologetic. You could start crying and hope that gets you out of a ticket. Personally, it's never worked for me, but that's okay. But there's still this exchange that's going on between you. So that's a big thing. But they also use the word among. So among individuals. Well, that's when we move. We go from a interpersonal communication to group communication or public communication. So there might be this whole thing that's going on among us, not just a between, but this among that happens. So I've got all of these individuals that are existing as individuals. They're autonomous individuals, but the communication is what joins us together. So we have this among, and we're sharing meaning. We're sharing information among us. That's a really important part. So that's critical to be thinking about, that, no matter how big the group, even if I'm doing it through a technology, like right now, I'm talking to a camera. You're picking it up and saying, oh, he's talking to me. I mean, I'd like to think I'm talking to you, but I don't know who you are. You could be anybody. You could be a friend who's watching this. You could be a total stranger who just bumped across and thought this may look good. You might be a student who's getting this shown to you in a class from your teacher. Who knows? But I'm talking to a camera lens, speaking to a microphone. But I can't be ignorant that there's this among that is happening because it's going to another person or a potential large group of people. No idea. So you're picking up, you're watching the video, and here I am, looking at you, and you're saying, oh, he's talking to me. Which is why, of course, when we're watching, movies, we don't necessarily feel drawn in because we're watching people talk to each other. Very rarely do they break the fourth wall and turn and look at the camera and say something funny. It's weird and offsetting when people do that kind of thing. However, when you're watching someone report the news, they're talking directly to the camera. So this just in, there was a conflict at this one place, or this senator said this one thing, or whatever. And they're talking to you, the American people, or whoever else is watching around the world. Again, we have to recognize there is an among that is happening. So we can't just be ignorant thinking, I'm just talking to a piece of equipment, big deal. No, it's an among. So be aware of that. So it's between or among individuals through a common system of simple signs of behavior. Again, we got to break that all down too. A common system. So we have systems. There's all kinds of different systems of communication that are out there. But for us to communicate well, we need a common system. So if you pull out your Bible and go to Genesis 11, you'll read about the Tower of Babel. So the Tower of Babel is a very simple story. The people of the world decided we're going to build this tower to reach to heaven. And God said, whoa, that's pretty crazy what these guys are willing to do. So God went boop and gave them all separate language, and the tower work stopped immediately and the people scattered. Because if I'm speaking Russian, you're speaking Chinese, another person's speaking Spanish, and I'm speaking English, how good do you think our construction skills will be? I mean, if we can't talk about how to properly build a tower, we can't build a tower. So that's a very important lesson, and for us to understand the concept of a common system. So whenever I do these recordings, I'm speaking in English, but not just English, American English. I was born and raised in Pennsylvania, so that's part of it too. I was born and raised in Western Pennsylvania. That's also part of it too. But I'm not from Pittsburgh. I'm an hour north of Pittsburgh, and so I've got that level of English. So I've got all these different things, because if I just moved south an hour and say I moved to Pittsburgh, I might be talking like this and talking about how after I'm done with the video, I'm going to get a sandwich and watch the Stellar game. It just, go downtown and, do whatever my shopping I got to do. That's something that's different that we see among, even though we're speaking English, it sounds different. Or you might go down south and hear a Southern accent, but not just a Southern accent, one from Tennessee, but not just Tennessee, Middle Tennessee. You'll hear all these different accents as you go around the South. It's not just a typical Southern accent. So you've got to have all of these different things. You go up to New England, they have different New England accents depending on where you go. So you'll see that, and that's just not to America anyway, that's all over the world. You go to different countries and they have different dialects all around their countries as well. And why wouldn't they? Because they're made up of people. So, but at the end of the day, I need a common system. So again, I'm speaking English, but I'm speaking American English, because if I go over to Britain, I might talk about a lift instead of an elevator, or if I lift up in the hood of my car and they call it a bonnet instead, or I go into the trunk and they call it a boot. It's like, but I put a boot on my foot. I just don't understand. They call their tractor trailers lorries, but we have people in this country and we use lorry as a name to call them. So I'm not naming you after a truck, but again, you can just see it's all confusing, which is why we need a common system. So when I go to England, I can understand probably 95% of what they're saying, but it's that 5% that makes things a little muddy. Come back to Western Pennsylvania, 100%, no issues, no problem. So I've got this common system. So we're good with that framework, right? So there we go. We have a common system. So of what, though? Of symbols, signs, and behavior. So symbols. There are all these different symbols out there that we have that communicate things differently. And again, depending on where I am, those might not be common. So maybe when you were growing up, you were taught it's not nice to point. So you point at somebody and don't point. That's rude. It's like, so that's what what you might have been taught. But it's also very common to point. Where's the clock? Oh, it's over there. We don't go, it's over there. Or we might go, over there. But typically we just point, it's over there. But when we go, you, let me tell you about you, that's when we feel it threatening. It's like, oh, no, that is rude. Okay. But the way we're raised, we understand that. So that symbol, we have a common system for that symbol. We get it. But other countries, this might have a different meaning. I mean, we don't think about that, because if you don't go to another country and experience it, you never learn that. And little things that we have, like this, it's almost a universal sign for stop. But is it everywhere in the world? I mean, most places, yes, halt or stop or something like that. We get that. But, what about this? It's okay here. What about this? It's the peace sign here, or V for victory. And you have all of these other little signs that we offer, that we throw towards each other, that, if you're in the common system, you get it. But as soon as you move to a different system, now you might be insulting people. And you'll find out real quick when you go to another country that, guess what? That's actually the same as our middle finger. Oh my goodness, I did not mean to do that. But, you've already created the international incident. Good job. So we end up having that kind of situation where we wrestle with that. So we have a common system of symbols, also signs and behavior. So we start thinking the idea of all these different things that we focus on whenever we look at signs. A lot of times when you look at signs, we look at words and semantics and semiotics, and we see how we take a word, we take the letter C, A, T, put them together, and we say this is going to be the word cat. That's how we're going to pronounce it. And when we say cat, we mean that four-legged feline. And if we were talking about a domesticated cat, then it's the four-legged feline that lives in your house that throws up on your carpet at 2 a.m. Cat. That's what we mean when we see C-A-T. But as you were taught growing up with English, you know that the letter C could be a hard C or a soft C. So it's either a K or a S sound. A could be long A, or it could be a lowercase a, and it could be A or ah. And T is pretty much the hard T. So it could be cat, it could be Kate, it could be sat, it could be sate. But somebody somewhere said, no, it's going to be cat. That's how we'll pronounce it. And we mean the four-legged feline. So when you see cat, we know what a cat is. So again, that's a common system of signs. And so we have the American alphabet, which is the same as the alphabet around a lot of other places in the country or the world. And other people have almost the same alphabet, but they might change a few things about theirs that we don't have. Like in Spanish, they'll put that little squiggle over an N, which is what's called a tilde. So that's where you get like jalapeno. So it's a ñ instead of just an N. So here we might say jalapeno, where they say jalapeno because it's got that tilde over the N. So we don't have an N with a tilde in the American alphabet. And then you go over to, say, Russia, and they've got like backwards R's and things like that. And you're like, what in the world? Again, that's their common system, and it works well for them, but it's chaos to us. And then you move to something else that's character-based, like Korean or Chinese or Japanese, and we have no idea how to even read it. But they think the same thing when they read ours, because they're like, what is this Q thing you've got going on? Well, we know what it is. Well, of course, because it's our common system. So we understand those signs. And the last one is behavior. So a common system of symbols, signs, and behavior. What is proper behavior in a communicative aspect? So for example, if I was teaching a class, I don't expect students to stand up on the desk and start doing like the chicken dance. It might be great for a wedding, but not in a classroom. That's not a common behavior that you would see in a classroom. You're supposed to be sitting attentively at your desk. You're supposed to be taking notes. You're not supposed to be on your phone. You're not supposed to be sleeping. Those are unfortunately they're getting to be common. But the common behavior type is to be sitting there attentively as a student and learning things. At work, you're supposed to be doing certain things. There's certain behaviors you're supposed to do. There's certain behaviors you're not supposed to do. When you're out in public, when you're at the movie theater, when you're at a restaurant, it doesn't matter. There are common behaviors that are expected communicatively at each place. So we count on that common system of behaviors because, well, it makes sense for us. I mean, even take basic things like driving down the road. What stops the other person from swerving into you and hitting you? I mean, what, a painted line? That's supposed to stop a 4,000-pound car? We all know it doesn't do that. What happens is there's a common behavior that we share. I stay on my side, you stay on your side, and we'll just go right by each other, and we'll trust that we're doing this right. If you want to see what happens when you get away from the common system, just start doing this down the road. What could go wrong, right? Until, of course, you crash into somebody because they're not expecting your uncommon system of behavior. So our system of behavior says drive down the road, and not just down the road, but you drive on the right side of the road. Go to Britain, and they're on the left side of the road. So, it's one of those things that when you move to that common system, you have to understand what's going on. So you have that behavior. So once again, it's a process where you exchange information and meaning between and among individuals through a common system of symbols, signs, and behavior. If you work through that definition and think where you are in each one of those pieces and parts, You'll find out how well you are moving along in the communication process. And also, when you find yourself into a different system, you'll understand why it's not just like your home. Why can't this just be like my hometown? Because it's not. They have their own common system, their own way of doing things. So as you move around and as you try to master your own communication system and your own abilities as a communicator, be thinking of that definition and how you can best use it and work through it. And once you start moving through these pieces and parts, you will improve. And you'll start to understand why people are different communicators than you and why you're different than them too. So that's what I have for you today. Thank you very much for tuning in. And as always, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you didn't like what you heard, that's okay. Thanks for tuning in this long anyway. But I'll see you next time on Communicology.